Ethan adjusted the straps of his backpack, feeling the weight of his equipment pulling down on his shoulders as he trekked through the dense forest. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of pine and damp earth surrounding him. He had been in these woods for weeks, documenting rare wildlife and collecting data on an unknown energy source that had been detected nearby. What he hadn't expected was to find something otherworldly. A faint hum caught his attention as he stepped over a moss-covered rock. At first, it had been almost imperceptible, but as he moved deeper into the forest, the sound grew louder. It wasn't mechanical, nor was it something natural. Ethan's heart raced as he followed the sound to a small clearing hidden between towering trees. In the center of the clearing, something metallic gleamed in the sunlight. Ethan approached cautiously, pushing through the underbrush until he could see it clearly. There, in the middle of the wilderness, was a sleek silver ship, its surface smooth and seamless. Unlike anything he had ever seen before, it had crashed, leaving a small crater in the earth, and steam rose from its surface as if it had only recently landed. He swallowed hard, trying to comprehend what he was looking at. This was no human-made craft. His fingers twitched toward the camera in his bag, but something held him back. He knew he wasn't alone. A soft rustle to his right made him freeze. Slowly, Ethan turned, his eyes scanning the shadows between the trees, and then he saw her. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure, slender, humanoid, but undeniably alien. Her skin shimmered with a faint iridescence, shifting between shades of silver and violet. Her eyes were large and expressive, glowing faintly with an inner light. She was unlike anything he had ever imagined, and yet there was something familiar in the way she watched him, as if she were just as surprised to see him as he was to see her. Ethan took a step back, his mind racing. Should he run? Should he try to communicate? Before he could decide, the alien girl stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. Who are you?" Ethan stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien didn't respond, at least not with words. Instead, Ethan felt a sudden pressure in his mind, like someone was gently probing his thoughts. His head swam, and for a moment, he couldn't tell where his own thoughts ended and someone else's began. The sensation was overwhelming, disorienting, but not entirely unpleasant. I can't understand you," Ethan muttered, clutching his head. "Please, stop." The pressure eased, and Ethan blinked, trying to steady himself. When he looked up, the alien girl was standing closer now, her eyes locked onto his. She raised a hand, palm outward, and Ethan could feel a faint pulse of energy emanating from her. It wasn't threatening, but it was powerful, like a wave of emotion crashing over him. "I don't know if you can understand me," Ethan said, taking a deep breath, "but I'm not here to hurt you." The alien girl tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. She lowered her hand, and for a moment, there was silence between them. Then, unexpectedly, a voice echoed in Ethan's mind, soft, hesitant, but clear. "You human," the voice said, as if testing the words for the first time. Ethan's eyes widened. "Ah yes," he said, stunned. "I'm human. You can speak to me." "Telepathy," the voice replied. "Not perfect, but I try." Ethan exhaled in relief, though his heart still pounded in his chest. This was real. He was communicating with an alien through some kind of telepathic link. He had so many questions, but he didn't know where to start. "I'm Ethan," he said, pointing to himself. "What's your name?" There was a pause before the alien girl responded. "Clara," the voice said softly. "I. Stranded." Ethan frowned, glancing at the damaged ship behind her. "You crashed here." Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. "Need help." Ethan hesitated, glancing around the clearing. He was just a researcher, not a mechanic or a diplomat. But how could he say no to this? If there was one thing he knew, it was that this moment, this encounter, was bigger than anything he'd ever imagined. I'll help you, he said finally, but you have to trust me. Sarah's eyes softened, and she took another step toward him. Trust, difficult. Humans, dangerous. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't blame her for being cautious. Humans could be dangerous. But something in her tone, the way she seemed to be struggling with the idea of trust, made him think there was more to her story. I'm not like that, Ethan said, holding her gaze. I won't hurt you. For a long moment, Sarah didn't move. Then slowly she nodded. We see. As the sun began to set behind the trees, Ethan knew this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. He had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but one thing was certain: his life and Axara's would never be the same. Ethan sat by the edge of the clearing, watching Sarah as she inspected the damage to her ship. Her movements were graceful yet deliberate, her fingers lightly brushing the surface of the craft. Despite the situation, he found himself mesmerized by her presence. She seemed fragile, almost ethereal, yet there was a strength in her that he couldn't deny. Her ability to communicate telepathically, though imperfect, opened a door to a connection unlike anything he'd ever experienced. I can help, Ethan offered, standing up and walking toward her, careful not to startle her. Sarah glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. How? He shrugged, feeling a little out of his depth. I don't know much about alien technology, but I can try to understand it. Maybe we can figure it out together. She studied him for a moment, her large eyes reflecting the dying light of the evening. Finally, she gave a small nod and motioned for him to come closer. Ethan knelt beside her and examined the ship's hull. It was sleek, almost organic in design, with no visible seams or joints. Whatever technology her people used, it was light years beyond anything humans had. Sarah pointed to a section of the ship that had been severely damaged during the crash. Core, damaged, need energy, to fix. Ethan frowned, trying to make sense of her words. Energy, like electricity. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but more. Ethan tilted his head, confused. More? What do you mean? Sarah's gaze shifted toward him, and he felt the faintest brush of her thoughts against his own. Not just power. My people use mind. Psychic energy, ship, needs both. Ethan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Psychic energy. So, you mean, you power the ship with your mind? She nodded again, this time more firmly. Yes, but after crash, too weak. He rubbed the back of his neck, considering her words. Is there any way I can help with that? I mean, I'm not psychic, but maybe there's something I can do to help you recharge or something. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the decision in her mind. Finally she spoke, her mental voice softer than before. Human minds strong. Different. Unpredictable. Ethan chuckled nervously. Yeah, we humans have a reputation for that. But maybe that's a good thing in this case. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if considering the possibility. Maybe, but dangerous. What's dangerous? He asked, concerned. Sarah paused, her gaze lowering to the ground. If we link minds, your emotions, strong, could overwhelm. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Link minds. The idea was both fascinating and terrifying. He had already felt her presence in his thoughts earlier, but it had been distant, like a whisper. Now she was talking about something deeper, something that could be risky for both of them. Look, I don't want to hurt you, Ethan said gently. If this is too dangerous, we can find another way. Sarah shook her head, her expression resolute. No, must try. If not, we fail. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation. He didn't fully understand how this was going to work, but he knew they didn't have many options. If Sarah's ship couldn't be repaired, she would be stranded on Earth, and who knew what her people would do if they found out. And then there were the human authorities. If they caught wind of her presence, it could spell disaster for her. All right, Ethan said, steeling himself. Let's do it. Sarah stood up and extended her hand toward him. Ethan hesitated for a second, then took her hand, feeling a strange warmth spread through his palm at the touch of her cool skin. Her eyes glowed faintly as she closed them, and he felt the familiar pressure in his mind, only this time it was stronger. "Close your eyes," she instructed, her voice a gentle pulse in his thoughts. Ethan obeyed, taking slow, deep breaths. At first, there was nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. But then, gradually, he felt something stir in the depths of his mind. It was like someone was opening a door, one that had always been there, but he had never noticed before. His thoughts swirled, blending with emotions and memories, all of them swirling in a chaotic storm. Then, he felt Sarah's presence. It was like a soft touch at the edge of his consciousness, calming the storm and drawing his attention to her. Her mind was vastly different from his, calm, focused, and controlled. But underneath that calmness, he sensed something else: fear. "Sarah?" he thought, unsure if she could hear him. "Yes," came her reply, soft and distant, like a voice carried on the wind. "You're afraid," Ethan said, the realization hitting him. There was a long pause before she answered. "Yes, my people fear humans. Your emotions, unpredictable, dangerous." Ethan frowned. "Why?" "Because," Tara explained, her thoughts brushing against his like a breeze, "you feel so much. Your emotions, uncontrolled. You fight, even when hurt, even when hopeless." Ethan was quiet for a moment, digesting her words. He had never thought about it that way before, but it made sense. Humans were resilient, sometimes to a fault. They fought against the odds, even when everything seemed lost. Maybe that's what made them dangerous. "But that's also what makes us strong," he said finally. "Our emotions, they drive us. They make us fight for what we care about." Sarah's presence in his mind flickered, as if she were considering his words. Strong, but destructive. Ethan couldn't argue with that. Humanity had its share of darkness, but there was also light, hope, compassion, love. He wondered if Sarah's people understood that side of humans. Maybe, he thought, if we work together, we can find a balance. Sarah didn't reply immediately, but Ethan felt a subtle shift in her presence. It was as if she were beginning to understand, or at least to accept that their differences might not be an insurmountable barrier. "Maybe," she whispered in his mind. The mental connection slowly faded, and Ethan opened his eyes to find Sarah staring at him with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something he couldn't quite define. For the first time, he felt like they were beginning to understand each other, even if it was just a small step forward. "Thank you," Kara said aloud, her voice soft but steady. Ethan smiled. "We're not done yet. We've still got a ship to fix." Sarah nodded, and for the first time since they met, Ethan saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. As they turned back to the ship, he couldn't help but wonder what other challenges lay ahead. But whatever they were, he knew they would face them together. The next few days were a blur of work, strategy, and growing trust between Ethan and Sarah. They spent hours at the crash site, working together to repair the ship's systems. Sarah showed Ethan how to harness basic energy from Earth's natural environment: sunlight, heat, even the electromagnetic fields around them. Yet, despite their progress, they both knew they still had a long way to go before Sarah could leave Earth. And as each day passed, the tension between them grew more complex. Sarah had slowly begun to open up about her world, her people, and why they feared humans. It wasn't just the unpredictability of human emotions, it was the sheer raw force behind them. While Sarah's species thrived on order, precision, and controlled psychic bonds, humans were volatile. They fought even when the odds were against them, driven by an intensity of feeling that Sarah's people considered reckless. Despite that, Sarah couldn't help but feel drawn to Ethan in ways she didn't understand. There was something about his resilience, his ability to push through even when things seemed hopeless, that intrigued her. One afternoon, as they worked in silence, Ethan paused to wipe the sweat from his brow. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of wildlife, the chirping of birds, and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was peaceful, until they both heard the distant hum of a helicopter. Farah froze, her luminous eyes widening in alarm. Ethan looked up, squinting at the sky as the sound grew louder. It was coming closer, fast. "Damn it," Ethan muttered under his breath. He stood up, scanning the sky. "They must have found us." "Who?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern. "The government," Ethan replied, his mind racing. "I've been careful, but I guess someone saw something. They're probably looking for you." Sarah's eyes darkened with worry. "What do they want?" Ethan turned to her, his expression grim. "They'll want to capture you, study you. You're proof that we're not alone in the universe. They'll want to figure out how you work, how your technology works." She took a step back, shaking her head. "No, we cannot. Let them take me." Ethan's mind raced as he grabbed his bag and stuffed their equipment inside. "We have to go, now." Sarah didn't hesitate. She followed him as they bolted into the thick forest, the sound of the helicopter growing louder behind them. The trees provided some cover, but Ethan knew it wouldn't be enough if the chopper had infrared sensors. They were out of time. As they ran, Ethan's mind was in overdrive, searching for a plan. Sarah moved effortlessly through the forest, her movements graceful, but he could sense her fear. It wasn't just about being captured, it was something deeper, something that went beyond the immediate danger. They reached a steep hill, and Ethan paused, panting as he looked back. The helicopter hovered over the crash site now, and men in dark uniforms were descending from ropes. They were too close. "We can't outrun them," Tara said, her voice tight with tension. Ethan knew she was right. They needed a different strategy. He glanced around, his eyes landing on a cave hidden by overgrown vines. It was small, barely noticeable, but it might just be enough. "This way," he said, grabbing Zara's arm and pulling her toward the cave. They ducked inside, crouching in the darkness. The sound of the helicopter blades thumped above them, vibrating the air. Ethan held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest as the noise of footsteps grew louder outside. "Stay quiet," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah nodded, her glowing eyes flickering in the dim light. She looked tense, her muscles coiled as if ready to spring into action. Minutes passed, each one dragging longer than the last, but the footsteps eventually faded. Ethan exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. They weren't out of the woods yet, literally, but for now, they were safe. Sarah turned to him, her voice a quiet whisper in his mind. "Why do they hump like this?" Ethan sighed. "Humans have a way of fearing what they don't understand. They want to control you, to make sure you aren't a threat." "I don't want to harm anyone," Tara said, her mental voice tinged with sadness. "But if they take me, my people will come." Ethan's blood ran cold at her words. He had known there was more at stake than just Dora's safety, but hearing her say it so plainly made it real. If the government captured her, it could spark a conflict far beyond Earth. He couldn't let that happen. "We won't let them take you," Ethan said firmly. "We'll figure this out." Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "You, willing to risk much for me?" Ethan met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "You're not the enemy. I know that." For a moment, there was silence between them, but it was charged with something deeper. Ethan could feel the connection between them growing stronger, not just through their telepathic link, but emotionally. Sarah was no longer just an alien to him. She was someone he cared about, someone he wanted to protect. Sarah's eyes softened. "Ethan, I must tell you something." He frowned. "What is it?" "My people, they watch," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly in his mind. "If I do not return soon, they will come for me. And if they find humans, if they see your people as a threat." Ethan's heart sank. "They'll attack, won't they?" She nodded, her expression pained. "Yes, my people believe. Humanity is too dangerous. They fear your unpredictability. Ethan rubbed his temples, the gravity of the situation settling over him like a heavy weight. This wasn't just about getting Zara home. This was about preventing a potential war between two species, one that humanity would almost certainly lose. "We need to get you off this planet," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "We need to fix your ship before it's too late." Zara looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more, something that neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. "Yes," she said softly, "but first, we must survive." Ethan nodded, determination hardening his resolve. He wasn't about to give up. Together, they would face whatever came their way, but the clock was ticking. The fate of two worlds rested in their hands, and there was no turning back now. Ethan and Zara lay low in the cave for hours, waiting for any sign that the search had moved on. The forest outside was quiet now, but the tension between them was palpable. It wasn't just the imminent danger from the government forces hunting them, it was something deeper, something that had been building ever since their minds first touched. When they finally emerged from the cave, the sky was dark, stars glittering through the tree canopy. The helicopter was gone, but Ethan knew they weren't out of danger yet. Whoever was after them wouldn't stop until they had what they were looking for. Zara. "We need to get back to the ship," Ethan said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "We don't have much time." Zara nodded, her gaze scanning the trees. Her luminous eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, a reminder of just how different she was from him. And yet, the connection between them felt more intense than ever. As they made their way through the dense forest, Ethan's mind raced with questions. He wanted to know more about her people, about what they feared, and most of all, why she seemed so conflicted whenever their minds connected. There was something she wasn't telling him, something important. They reached the clearing where Zara's ship lay partially hidden by the undergrowth. Ethan crouched beside it, checking the repairs they had made earlier. The energy core was still damaged, but they had managed to jury-rig some of the ship's systems using solar panels and the natural energy around them. It wasn't enough to get the ship fully operational, but it was a start. "We're going to need more power," Ethan said, frowning as he studied the readings on one of the ship's consoles. "A lot more." Zara was silent, standing a few feet away, staring up at the stars. Her thoughts were distant, her mind a storm of emotions that Ethan could barely sense through their telepathic link. "Zara," he asked gently, standing up and walking toward her. "What's wrong?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, without turning to face him, she spoke in a soft, almost broken voice. "My people, they will come soon. They will not wait much longer." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. How soon? Zara finally turned to look at him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before, fear. "Days, maybe less." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. If Zara's people arrived and saw humanity as a threat, it could trigger a conflict Earth wasn't prepared for. And from what Zara had told him, her species was far more advanced than humans. "We need to get you out of here before that happens," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the panic building inside him. "If we can get your ship working." "No," Zara interrupted, her voice trembling. "There is something else." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Zara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. She took a deep breath, and Ethan felt the faintest brush of her mind against his, a tentative touch, as if she were trying to find the right words. "My people," she began slowly, "we do not form connections the way humans do. Our minds are linked, controlled, but with you, it is different." Ethan blinked, unsure of what she was trying to say. "Different how?" She stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face. "When I first linked with you, I felt something I have never felt before. Your emotions, your thoughts, they are chaotic, unpredictable, but they are also powerful." Ethan swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. "What are you saying?" Zara closed her eyes, her voice a soft whisper in his mind. I have never experienced this before. With you, I feel more. I feel things I cannot explain. My people would fear this. They would consider it dangerous. Ethan took a step back, his mind reeling. Dangerous. Why? Because, Kara said, opening her eyes, it is not logical. It is not controlled. My people believe that emotions cloud judgment. They avoid physical connection, emotional ties. But with you, I cannot stop it. Her confession hung in the air between them, and Ethan felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over him. He had sensed the bond between them growing stronger, but he hadn't realized just how deep it went. Sarah wasn't just talking about their telepathic link, she was talking about something far more personal. Sarah, he began, unsure of what to say. I should not feel this way, she continued, her voice trembling. It is forbidden, but I cannot deny it. Ethan's heart ached as he looked at her, realizing just how much she was risking by telling him this. Her people didn't just fear humans, they feared the very emotions that were now threatening to consume her. You don't have to deny it, Ethan said softly, taking a step closer to her. Emotions aren't a weakness, Kara. They're what make us human. They give us strength, even when things seem hopeless. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. But what if they destroy us? They won't, Ethan said firmly. We'll find a way through this. Together. For a moment, they stood in silence, the air around them thick with unspoken tension. Then, slowly, Sarah reached out and placed her hand on his chest, just above his heart. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he felt the warmth of her touch, the gentle pulse of energy that flowed between them. You believe in this? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan nodded, his hand gently covering hers. I do, and I believe in you. Sarah's eyes shimmered with emotion, and for the first time, she allowed herself to lean into the connection they shared. It was a tentative step, but it was enough to ignite something between them, something that went beyond words, beyond logic. The bond between them pulsed with life, a spark of hope in the darkness that surrounded them, and as they stood there, hand in hand, Ethan knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. But their moment of peace was short-lived. The sound of footsteps echoed through the clearing, and Ethan turned just in time to see figures emerging from the shadows, government agents, weapons drawn. Don't move. One of them barked, his voice cold and commanding. Ethan's heart raced as he and Sarah slowly raised their hands, their minds scrambling for a way out. They had been found. But this time, Ethan wasn't just thinking about survival. He was thinking about Sarah and the bond they had just begun to explore. And he would do whatever it took to protect her. The armed agents surrounded them, their faces cold and unyielding. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he stood frozen next to Sarah, both of them with their hands raised. The dark uniforms of the government agents, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight, made the situation painfully clear. There was no easy way out this time. Step away from the alien, one of the agents barked, his weapon trained on Sarah. Ethan clenched his fists, his mind racing. Sarah stood motionless, her glowing eyes betraying no emotion, though Ethan could feel her fear ripple through their tenuous mental link. The connection between them was growing stronger, but there was no time to fully understand it now. All he knew was that she was in danger, and he had to protect her. You don't understand, Ethan said, his voice shaking but firm. She's not a threat. She's an extraterrestrial on Earth soil. That makes her a threat, the agent snapped, stepping closer. We have orders to bring her in for questioning. Stand aside, or you'll be taken in too. Ethan's mind reeled. If they took Sarah, they'd likely imprison her, dissect her mind, and experiment on her. They would never understand what she truly was, what she and her people were capable of. And worse, if her species sensed what was happening, they would come for her, bringing unimaginable consequences for Earth. Sarah's thoughts flickered through his mind. Ethan, if they take me, my people will come. They will see this as an attack. We must stop them. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had to act now. No, he said, stepping in front of Tara, blocking the agent's path. I won't let you take her. The agent's face darkened. You don't have a choice. Move, or we'll move you. Ethan felt a surge of determination, stronger than anything he had ever felt before. He wasn't going to stand by and let them hurt her. Without thinking, he reached out to Xara through their telepathic link, urging her to trust him, to follow his lead. Xara, we have to run. Can you use your abilities to stop them? Xara hesitated for only a moment, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and resolve. I can try, but it is dangerous. If I push too hard, I could hurt them. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't want anyone to get hurt, but they had no other option, just enough to slow them down. We need time to escape. She nodded, her glowing eyes flickering as she focused. Ethan could feel the shift in the air as Xara's psychic energy began to build, like static electricity before a storm. The agents seemed to sense something too. One of them shouted a command, but before they could react, Xara unleashed a pulse of energy that rippled through the clearing. The agents staggered, their weapons clattering to the ground as they grabbed their heads, grimacing in pain. It wasn't enough to seriously harm them, but it bought them a few precious seconds. Run, Ethan shouted, grabbing Xara's hand. They bolted into the forest, the darkness swallowing them as they fled. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps as they weaved through the trees. He didn't know where they were going. He just knew they had to get as far away from the agents as possible. Behind them, he could hear shouts and the sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush. The agents were recovering quickly. They didn't have much time. Ethan, Xara's voice in his mind was weak, strained. I cannot keep this up. I am losing strength. Ethan glanced at her, worry gnawing at him. Xara looked pale, her usual glow dimming as the strain of using her psychic abilities took its toll. He had to think of something fast. Up ahead, Ethan spotted a narrow ravine, its jagged edges descending into darkness. It wasn't an ideal hiding place, but it might give them a chance to regroup. This way, Ethan said, pulling Xara toward the ravine. They scrambled down the rocky slope, the loose dirt and stones making it difficult to keep their footing. When they reached the bottom, they ducked into a small crevice between two large boulders, their backs pressed against the cool stone. For a few moments, all Ethan could hear was the sound of his own heavy breathing and the distant shouts of the agents above. He closed his eyes, trying to calm his racing heart, his mind still buzzing from the intensity of their escape. Ethan, Xara's voice trembled in his thoughts. I cannot do this alone. He opened his eyes and looked at her. She was trembling, her skin now a pale silver, and her usually vibrant eyes dull with exhaustion. The mental strain of using her powers to protect them was clearly taking its toll. You're not alone, Ethan said softly, taking her hand in his. I'm with you. We'll figure this out together. Xara looked at him, her eyes filled with something between gratitude and sorrow. You do not understand. If my people come, they will not ask questions. They will see this as a threat to me, and they will act. If I do not return. Her voice broke off, and Ethan could feel the weight of the choice hanging between them. If Tara stayed on Earth, her people would likely see humanity as a threat and retaliate. If she left, it might be the only way to prevent a war, but it would also mean she would be gone, possibly forever. He tightened his grip on her hand. There's still time. We can find another way. Xara shook her head, her expression filled with anguish. There is no other way. I must leave. If I stay, they will come. Ethan's heart ached. He had known from the beginning that their time together was limited, but hearing her say it out loud made it real. If Tara left, it would be to protect both their worlds. But it meant losing her, losing the connection they had formed, and losing the hope that had grown between them. I don't want to lose you, Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. Xara's eyes shimmered, and for a moment, their minds were completely open to each other. No barriers, no hesitation. He could feel her fear, her sadness, her longing. She didn't want to leave either. "I do not want to go," she admitted, her voice trembling in his thoughts. "But if I stay, we will lose everything." Ethan closed his eyes, struggling to accept the reality of the situation. He wanted to tell her to stay, to fight with him, to defy the odds. But deep down, he knew she was right. If she stayed, it could lead to a catastrophe that neither of them could prevent. "We'll fix your ship," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We'll get you home. But promise me, if there's any way at all, that you can come back." Sarah's hand tightened around his, and she nodded. "I will find a way, I promise." The sound of footsteps grew louder again, and Ethan knew their time was running out. They had to move. With one last, lingering look, they climbed out of the ravine and began making their way back towards Sarah's ship. The agents were still searching for them, but Ethan no longer cared about the danger. He had made his choice, and so had Zara. They would fix the ship, and she would leave. But their story wasn't over yet. As they made their way back to the crash site, Ethan's mind raced with a mix of dread and determination. He and Zara were out of time. The agents were closing in, and Zara's people would arrive soon if she didn't leave. Yet, the thought of her leaving for good gnawed at him. There had to be another way, some way to stop this looming disaster. But every option felt like it was slipping through his fingers. When they reached the ship, Ethan and Zara moved quickly. The repairs they had started days ago were still unfinished, and Zara's strength was waning with each passing moment. She connected to the ship's systems, her fingers moving deftly over the controls, but her movements were slower than before. Her psychic energy, already drained from their escape, was now nearly depleted. Ethan grabbed a toolkit from the side panel of the ship and worked alongside her, trying to fix the damaged energy core. He glanced at Zara, watching as she struggled to maintain her focus. "How much longer?" Ethan asked, worry creeping into his voice. Zara looked up at him, her glowing eyes dim with exhaustion. "Not long, but I need more energy." Ethan's stomach tightened. He had seen how Zara's people harnessed energy, both physical and psychic. But with her weakened state, there wasn't enough to power the ship. They needed something more, something stronger. Ethan paused, thinking, What if I help you, like before?" Zara's eyes widened slightly. "Our link, it is dangerous. If you push too hard, it could harm both of us." Ethan shook his head. "We don't have a choice. I trust you, Zara. We've come this far together, and I'm not about to give up now." Zara hesitated, her gaze flickering with uncertainty. But then she nodded, the determination returning to her face. "All right, but be careful, Ethan. If the connection becomes too strong." "I'll handle it," Ethan said firmly. He moved closer to her, placing his hand gently on hers. Zara closed her eyes, and Ethan felt the familiar pressure in his mind, like a door opening between them. But this time, the connection was stronger, more intense. He could feel Zara's thoughts mingling with his own, her exhaustion, her fear, her hope. And then he felt something else, an immense surge of energy, like a river rushing through his veins. For a moment, it was overwhelming. Ethan gasped, his mind reeling as the psychic link between them grew more powerful than ever. It wasn't just a mental connection, it was physical, emotional. He could feel every pulse of Zara's being, every thought, every emotion as if they were one. But he didn't back down. He focused, channeling his energy into the connection, letting it flow into Zara. The ship's systems began to hum, lights flickering to life as the power levels rose. Zara's eyes glowed brighter as she absorbed the energy, her movements becoming steadier, more controlled. But Ethan could feel the strain on both of them. The connection was pushing them to their limits. "Ethan," Zara's voice echoed in his mind, soft but strained. "I cannot hold on much longer." "Just a little more," Ethan gritted through his teeth, his mind swimming with the intensity of the link. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath them. Ethan's eyes shot open, and he turned to see a dark shape descending from the sky, a ship sleek and massive, with a glowing blue light at its core. Sarah's people had arrived. "They're here," Ethan said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to get you out of here now." Sarah's eyes flickered with fear, but she nodded. "I am ready, but—" Her voice faltered, and Ethan felt a surge of emotion from her, fear, sorrow, and something deeper. She wasn't just afraid for herself. She was afraid for him, for what might happen if her people saw humans as a threat. "Go," Ethan urged, squeezing her hand. "You have to leave before they land." But Sarah shook her head. "If they see you, if they know we are linked, it will be worse. They will attack." Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't let her leave without a chance to stop her people from retaliating. He had to do something, anything, to show them that humanity wasn't a threat. A plan began to form in his mind, desperate but clear. "We'll talk to them," he said, his voice steady. "Together." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "No, it is too dangerous. They will not listen." "They have to," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "If they see that you've made a connection with a human, if they understand that we can coexist, maybe they won't see us as a threat." Sarah's gaze softened, her thoughts flickering with doubt and hope. "You are risking everything, Ethan, for me." He smiled, his heart pounding. "I told you, I believe in you, and I believe in us." The massive alien ship hovered above them now, casting a shadow over the clearing. A beam of light shot down, and within moments, several figures appeared, tall, ethereal beings with the same iridescent skin and glowing eyes as Kara. They moved with grace, their expressions cold and unreadable. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke telepathically to her people. "I am Sarah. I have returned, but I am not alone." The alien beings turned their gazes toward Ethan, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. One of them, taller and more imposing than the others, stepped forward. "What is this, Sarah? Why do you stand with this human?" Ethan felt their collective gaze on him, a pressure in his mind that was both unsettling and intimidating. But he stood his ground, his thoughts clear and determined. "This human," Sarah began, her voice strong despite the tension. "He helped me. He saved me. He is not a threat. We have connected." There was a ripple of shock through the group, their eyes widening at her words. The tall figure stepped closer, his expression darkening. "A connection with a human. This is unacceptable, dangerous." Sarah's voice trembled, but she held her ground. "No, it is different than what we thought. They are not as we feared. They are strong, resilient, but they are not our enemies." The tension in the air was palpable, the alien beings exchanging wary glances. Ethan could feel their suspicion, their fear, but he also sensed something else, curiosity. "Please," Sarah pleaded, her voice filled with emotion. "Let us show you. We can learn from them, just as they can learn from us." For a long moment, there was silence. The tall figure studied them both, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he turned to the others and nodded. "Very well," he said, his voice filled with reluctant acceptance. "We will listen." Ethan exhaled, relief flooding through him. It wasn't over yet, but it was a start. Sarah turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, something that spoke of the bond they had forged, one that would transcend the boundaries of their worlds. "Thank you," she whispered in his mind, her voice filled with warmth. "For everything." Ethan smiled, his heart full. "We're not done yet, but we'll face whatever comes next, together." And as the alien ship lifted back into the sky, carrying Sarah and her people with it, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. Their connection, born from fear and hope, from two very different worlds, would change everything. For both humanity and the stars beyond.